So yes, we are going to go into a new series. We spent the last couple months going through the book of Philippians, had a great time slowly studying through what the early church of Philippi received from Paul. So now as we walk through what it looks like to understand generosity, and like I said, I'm going to probably just say this over and over and over again. Generosity, first and foremost, should make us think of the generosity of God, and then we can talk about what to do with it. But it begins with what has he given us and how generous is he? That's where we always start. But I'm gonna help you reframe a little bit of that word of generosity. So if you have your Bibles, we're gonna be in two places today. We're gonna start in Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, Jesus gives this, we've talked about this quite a bit in here, relatively well-known passage. He says this to a large group of people following him. Jesus said to the crowd, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Give something up. Give up your own way. Take up your cross daily and follow me. So there's this idea of giving something up so we gain life with him. Verse 24, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But look at the other side of this. Go ahead and go to the next one because we're going to read all of this together. Read this with me. But if you give, you're not reading with me very loud. Come on, it's 11 o'clock, church. Here we go. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Couple key parts here. First of all, the idea of give. It's this, yes, give something up. Give up your life. And notice, Jesus is not like, now make sure you give up this and a little bit over here and a little. He's like, no, you are to give up your life. But it's not just giving up your life because it's a nice thing to do or it's helpful for the people around you. Notice the reason why. Give up your life for my sake, Jesus says. My sake. He says, give up your life for the sake of the gospel so that you have a relationship with him. He's prioritizing your relationship with him over anything and everything else. Give up your life for the sake of Jesus, for the sake of his name, for the sake of the gospel. That's where generosity in our heads should start with. What has God given us? How generous is our God? And then when we think of generosity and what that means like for us, what that means we give up our life. We give up everything for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of him. Again, not because it's something we're supposed to do, not because we're trying to be nice or kind, but because Jesus says, for my sake, for the sake of the gospel. A couple other ways that I want you to think through is here's how we're gonna study through this idea of generosity. Jesus said to give up your what? Give up your life. So what does your life consist of? A whole lot. So we're gonna try to narrow that down so this isn't like a forever series, but just maybe like 4 to 5 weeks. We'll see how it goes. So here's how we're gonna talk through giving up your life. And how fancy is that? It actually spells life. No, I didn't come up with it, but I think it's great. So here's how I want you to think of life through the lens of generosity, that we are to give up our labor. That's our work. Those are the things that we do. We're gonna talk all about that today, so I'll get into it in just a second. We are also to give up our influence, meaning we are to allow God to use our influence with the people that we lead, the environments that we lead, the people that we know. So we go from what we do to now who we know. We give up, yes, finances is absolutely part of it. It is part of life, but it is not just about it's never about just being legalistic and I'm supposed to give this much to this place for this reason. No, God has given you resources. How are we called to give those away to the world for the sake of the gospel? So we'll spend some time talking about that. And then the last one is to give away or give your expertise, or maybe your experience, you could use that. This is the idea of your skills. It's what you know. So you go from what you do to who you know to what you have to now what you know. And that is obviously not all of our lives, but those encompass a big portion of our life that we are called to be generous with. Because first and foremost, we're gonna say it again, because he has been generous with us. Now we give away our life. We are generous with our labor, generous with our influence, our finances, and our experience and expertise for the sake of the gospel. That's how we're gonna walk through the next several weeks. Like I said, we're gonna focus on the work side today. Before we do that, I want hopefully you to lean in through this series. We say this quite a bit. It's not just about Sunday morning for 30 to 35 minutes. It's how do you lean in throughout the week? So I'm gonna give you 2 ways to lean in, and I think you're gonna get a lot more out of this Bible study with these two parts than just showing up on Sunday. It's great that you're here, that's a huge part of it, but here's some ways to lean in. The first one is see that QR code, unless you're on the front row, see that QR code on the back of your seat. If you'll scan that QR code, front row people, you can do it afterwards. Use that QR code, it'll take you to several next steps. We talk a lot about next steps around here. Towards the bottom is a button to hit subscribe to emails. I'm not gonna send you junk mail, that's not what it's for. You're sick of all of that, I have no doubt. But here's what this is for. There's an option to then choose the Bible study emails that we send out every single Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we're gonna send you a Bible study guide that takes what we talk about here out of this passage and helps you just think about it a little bit more deeply. To really get into it. You can do that on your own. You can do that with your family, spouse, friends, whatever. But the intent is to dig in just a little bit deeper. And it's gonna help put some things in context through stories. So sometimes when we read a passage in scripture or we talk about a biblical principle, it's like, yeah, that's great, but what does that really look like for me? Like, how is somebody living that out? What does it look like to be generous with your life? We're gonna put some videos in there of people that are living out a life of generosity, giving away their life for the sake of the gospel, and that just helps you, hopefully, maybe connect some dots and, oh, that's what it could look like. That's what it looked like in this moment or with this family or in this story. So we'd love to be able to share those with you. So doing a little bit more of a Bible study, hear some stories, and allow God to continue to work on your heart and what it means to live a generous life and give your life away for the sake of the gospel. That's one thing. The other thing is there's a great devotional. It's 28 days. You do one a day or however you want to split it up. It's called Whole Life Generosity. And it is not about finances. Once again, it is about giving your life away. It's about trusting God, recognizing what he's given you so that you can give your life away for the sake of the gospel. So you can take a picture of it. It's on Amazon. If you use the Scan Me code, that will take you to Amazon. I've got one right here. I've already got mine, but I got an extra one. So if somebody's like, yes, I would absolutely love to do this, and I don't want to wait for Amazon's 2-day shipping. Anybody want this one? I'll give you this one right here if you want it. Awesome. Here you go. I won't throw it at you. That's not going to end well. But it's a great 28-day devotional, really walks you through trusting in God, recognizing that he's a generous God, and then you begin a dialogue, that's called prayer, with God on what it looks like to then give your life away for the sake of the gospel. So between being here on a Sunday, doing the Bible studies on Tuesday, and if you want to do the daily devotional, I think you're going to get a lot out of what God would say to you through this series. All right, you ready to talk about work? Everybody loves talking about work. You almost love talking about work just as much as you love talking about money. So we started at work. Here's a couple things you need to understand about work. Because immediately, most likely, you think of your job. Job is what you get paid for. So some of you that already maybe doesn't sit well, some of you are like, I don't have a job. I can leave right now, and this doesn't apply to me. You're not off the hook. We're gonna think of work in 3 ways, in 3 categories. The first one is, yes, what you get paid for. The work that you do, you get a paycheck, we call that a job, so that is absolutely part of this discussion. But it's not the only part of the discussion. The other part is the work you do and you don't get paid for. We would call that serving or volunteering. And I'm not just talking about in the context of our church setting. You volunteer in so many other capacities in your community and with your neighbors and at your kids' school. And you have different functions that you're part of because you're passionate about it or because somebody voluntold you to be part of it. There's all kinds of ways that you are working but not getting paid. So the work you get paid for, the work you don't get paid for, and then there's a third category, the work that you do because you're responsible for that work. So you might even think of this as the house chores. You're not getting paid for it, and it's not really a volunteer job for you, but it has to get done. Like, this is my responsibility. Parenting would fall into this category. You don't get paid for it. It's not a volunteer opportunity, but they are your responsibility. Relationships fall under this. Relationships are work. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means it takes effort. It takes intentionality. You have to work on and in those relationships or they will cease to be relationships. You have to work. So think of, as we go through today, think of this through the lens of what you get paid for, what you don't get paid for, and what you are responsible for. And that includes all of us. So as we go through our study today, God, how do you want me to be generous with my work? With the work that I do and I get paid for, the work that I do and I don't get paid for, and the work that I do because I'm responsible for it. That's how I want us to begin to think. Does that make sense? Not if you're with me? Yeah, you guys are ready to talk about work. You're like, it's the weekend. You'll be there tomorrow, and there's plenty of work to do today. All right, John chapter 2. Love for you to be there. If you've got a Bible, be there. If not, maybe use your phone. I'll put scripture on the screens. We've got Bibles in the lobby that are our gift to you. We'd love for you to have a Bible that you can look at, see things in context. We're going to look at John chapter 2. We'll be there the rest of the morning. If you don't know this story, I'm going to give you the spoiler alert because I need you to know how the story ends so we can talk about it. This is known as Jesus' very first miracle. If you know it, he turned water into wine. That's right. So that's the story. That's where this is going. But I want us to look at the work along the way. To do that, we're going to see the work of Jesus, and then we're going to see the work of the workers. We're going to kind of look at it through those two lenses. The work of Jesus first, then the work of the workers. First, the work of Jesus. John chapter 2, verse 1. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. Pause there. Notice that Jesus is not showing up to this wedding party because he's officiating the wedding. He's not officiating it. He's not volunteering at the wedding. It's not like he's part of the volunteer setup team or he's helping out with like the wedding coordinating. He is just showing up. He's not serving. He's not working. He's not officiating. He's just invited. He's an attendee. We usually don't think of Jesus as an attendee. We usually think of him as the leader, the one moving and the one starting something. But in this moment, Jesus is the one just showing up. And it's not just him showing up. It's his mom is there as well as his disciples. All they did was show up. Here's why that's so important. And we don't talk about this enough. The value of showing up. Because when you show up, when Jesus showed up, when his disciples showed up, what happens? They become available. If you don't show up, guess what? You're not available to do any work. You're not available to do anything. But when you actually show up, now you're saying, God, here I am, use me, put me to work. When we refuse to show up, we step back and we're like, nah, I don't really want to get involved. I don't want to be part of it. But just by being there and being present, they are available. So I want you to start thinking in your context. What does it look like for you to be available? Where are you showing up? Here's a couple ways to think through it. You can ask yourself these questions. First one, where are you showing up consistently? So your job that you get paid for, you better be consistent or you will cease to be paid for it. So you are consistent in that work. You are there regularly. You are home regularly. You might have a volunteer role that you are in regularly. So think about the environments where you are there consistently. Think about the ones where you are there inconsistently. And that's not, I don't mean inconsistent as a bad thing to be consistent. There are some environments that you are in, that you show up in, that it's just seasonal. You're not there all the time, right? You go grocery shopping, hopefully not every single day. That's work right there. So you go as needed. My point is there's environments that you're in, not consistently, but God might still want to use you to do some pretty cool work in those moments. And then you think about, where do I need to show up just a little bit more? There might be a little tug of the Holy Spirit of, here's an area that I'm not in at all. I really do need to step into this environment because God might want to use me and put me to work in that environment. So where are you already at consistently? You're available. Where are you at inconsistently? Maybe you look at it through a different lens of being available. And what are you not showing up in that God might push you and say, nah, I've got some work for you to do and I need you to be available. That's the whole point. Jesus and his disciples are available just by showing up. They didn't intend to do some work, but God had work for them to do. So when you think about where you are being available, think of it in this way. Be ready and willing for God to use you and your work for him. Be ready and willing for your work, whatever you do. Again, paid, unpaid, or because it's your responsibility. Whether it's in consistent environments, inconsistent, or you're gonna start stepping into it, be ready and willing for your work, what you do to be used by God. That's the posture we need to think of in regards to our work, being available. So here's Jesus, his disciples, they were available as they were attending. Here's a problem that comes up. Verse 3, the wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, there's very few people in Jesus' life that could demand something of Jesus. Mom is one of them. I love that you see a little bit of the humanity side of this here. Jesus is fully God, fully man, but we see some of the humanity come out. So his mother told him, they have no more wine. Big problem. Verse 4, dear woman, That's not our problem. I love this dialogue. That's not our problem, Jesus replied. My time has not yet come. This is such a father or a mother-son moment, isn't it? Mom says, problem, fix it. And the son says, Mom, do I have to? Like, now's not the right time. Now's not my time, right? Mary brings up a problem. His mother brings up a problem, and Jesus says, it's not my problem, and it's not my time. Now, when we hear that, just me reading that, you may hear that through ears of, is Jesus being like mean and disrespectful? You could hear it in a disrespectful tone of, not my problem. We can hear it that way. Not my time, not my party, not my issue. Why are you involving me? We can hear it through the ears of Jesus being rude and selfish and unwilling to help. But if we understand the heart of Jesus and we understand what he's really focused on, it helps us understand what he's actually saying. Because I'll tell you, when Jesus said, it's not my problem, him saying that means something very different than if you or I were to say, not my problem. Here's what I mean by that. Jesus said, it's not my problem, but there is another part to what he said. You remember? He said, it's not my time. It's not my time yet. So he's helping us and helping his mom and the people around him understand, yes, it's a problem, but I'm focused on something else. So right here in this moment, at the very beginning of Jesus's ministry, at the beginning of his work on earth, Jesus is already focused on the cross. He is already focused on his mission to save the world by giving up his life. He's focused on his crucifixion and his death. He's already focused on it. So when he says, it's not my problem, he's saying, because my purpose, my mission is the cross, to give my life as a ransom for the entire world, to save the world through me giving my life up. That's his mission, that's what he's focused on. My time's not yet come. When Jesus said, not my problem, he's saying, because my purpose, my mission is to give my life away. Now, if I were to say, not my problem, you know what I'm actually focused on? Not self-sacrifice, I'm just focused on self. Jesus, when he said, not my problem, it's not yet my time, he's focused on sacrificing himself. When we say not my problem, we're saying, yeah, I want to focus on myself. I don't want to sacrifice. I don't want to get involved, so I'm going to step back. So even by the language that Jesus used, his heart posture is focused on giving his life away, where we say not my problem because we want to hold on to our life. We're focusing on self. He was focusing on self-sacrifice. I do love, though, and again, we know the end of the story. He's going to help. He's going to turn the water into wine and save the day at the party. And what I love that about what we see in Jesus' heart is even though he's focused on saving us, he still has a heart to serve us. Even as our Savior, he says, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. He's focused on the cross, giving his life away. But in this moment, he's also having a heart to serve the people around him. So that's what he's going to do. Verse 5, here's what happens next. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. Another good mom moment. Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Do you have an image in your mind? 6 stone jars, about 20 to 30 gallons in each, these big stone barrels. Each one could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Verse 7, Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. When the jars had been filled, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. So we looked at the work of Jesus being available and having a heart to serve others. Sacrifice and service. Now we're going to flip over and we're going to focus on the perspective from these servants, these workers. So put yourself in their shoes. You were brought on to do a job. Your job as a servant at this wedding is to serve the people at this wedding. So you are bussing tables, you are a waiter, you're a waitress, you're taking orders, you're getting them something to eat, you're refilling their drinks. That's your job. Then this mom shows up with her son. And she looks at you, she's not your boss, by the way, and he, the son, is not your boss. And she looks at you and says, do whatever he tells you to say, or tells you to do whatever he tells you to do. And you're like, but why? That's not my job. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is my work. This is my job description. And what he's telling me to do has nothing to do with my job. So what do we do? What does it look like to give your work away for the sake of the gospel? That's what we're going to see these servants and these workers do. So as we talk through it, I think it's going to be applicable for us. We're going to learn a lesson from them, and that still applies for us today. So the first one is follow Jesus while you work. Follow Jesus while you are at work. So for what Mary said, do whatever he tells you to do. In some environments, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like right now, you are at a Sunday morning church worship service. So if I were to say, do whatever Jesus tells you to do, you're like, yeah, that makes total sense. Absolutely. Like we talk about that. We say that quite, do what Jesus calls you to do. Do what his word says. But sometimes in a different context, you're like, I don't think that applies here. Work is one of them. We tend to separate our faith with the rest of our life, don't we? We do our faith stuff and we do whatever Jesus tells us to do. But then when we wake up Monday morning, we go to our job, the work that pays us, we're like, Jesus, I already gave you like that part yesterday, but now I've got to focus on my work at this place. We tend to separate our faith and what Jesus calls us to do from work and other parts of our life. We keep them compartmentalized. And what we see these workers do is they don't. They are following Jesus in their work, at their work, while they work. They're not at church. They're not sitting around with a Bible study group. They are in the middle of their job, and they are listening to the instructions of Jesus. They are following the words of Jesus. How different would our work days be, our work life be, if we didn't keep faith and work separate? And we said, no, I'm going to follow you, Jesus, with everything, all the time, especially in the middle of my work day. And again, whether work is what you're paid for, not paid for, or what you're just responsible for, we follow Jesus while we work. From that, notice what Jesus tells them to do. He begins to give them instructions. He says, fill the jars with water. Now, I'm imagining something as far as what their job description would have been, and I would imagine that filling these ceremonial washing jars had nothing to do with what they were supposed to actually do. This feels like an interruption. This feels like a detour to what they were originally supposed to do. I could imagine being one of these servants, one of these workers, and thinking like, that's not my job. Go find somebody else. That's not part of my responsibilities. I'm supposed to do this. And Jesus, you're telling me to do this. What we can learn from that is to allow Jesus to interrupt your work, because this is absolutely an interruption. If they follow Jesus' instructions to go fill up these 6 massive jars with water, if they follow his instructions, then that is going to pull them away from doing something else. The things that they originally were probably supposed to do. So they have to make a choice. Am I going to just keep doing what my work is supposed to be like? Or am I going to follow Jesus' instructions, listen to his words, and allow him to interrupt and maybe even give me a little bit of a detour? Will I allow him to redirect my work while I'm in the middle of work? That's what they begin to allow Jesus to do. And again, we'd have all the excuses. It's not my job. I don't want to. I'm not paid enough for that. Like we could go on and on and on. I don't have time for that. That doesn't fit into my schedule today. We'd have all the reasons on why not to allow Jesus to interrupt us at work. But what if we thought about it a little differently? Instead of this is why I can't, what if it was, man, I wonder what would happen if. I wonder what Jesus might be doing. Because here's the reality. The reality is we get so fixated and so focused on just getting our work done, we can easily miss the work that God is actually doing. We get so focused on our work, we miss how God is working in the moment. Say it like this: when we are working, it's easy to focus on our work rather than God's work, rather than how he is working. I experienced this in an extremely real way literally last night. I did not plan for this to be an illustration, but it fits, so here you go. So one of my rhythms is I work on sermon prep and all the things for Sunday throughout the week, of course. I do work Monday through the rest of the week. Some of you are like, do you just work Sundays? No. But on Saturday nights, one of my rhythms is after we hang out with the family, do dinner, all the things, I usually just go and get by myself for a little bit. I put some headphones in, open up my laptop and my Bible, and I just kind of pray through what we're doing today, what we're gonna be studying today, and just pray through it, go over some final last things, only for about an hour, hour and a half. So I'm in the middle of doing that late last night. Got my headphones in, my laptop's up, my Bible's out, And I'm focused, praying, going through it. And then my middle son comes over and he just stands like right next to me. So I take out my earbuds and I'm like, yeah. And he's like, can we go play basketball? And in that moment, I'm gonna be very transparent. No judgment, it's a safe place. In that moment, I'm gonna tell you what went in my heart and to my brain and almost came out of my mouth. Here was my first thought. No, I don't have time to go play basketball. I have been around all day today. We could have done it then. So no, I don't have time to play basketball with you right now. I am in the middle of finishing my prep for a sermon about generosity where we're talking about the work that we're supposed to surrender to God so we don't lose focus on his work. I don't have time for you. That thought got about right here. And I'm like, oh, this is what it means. So I took my headphones out, I closed my laptop, and we went and played basketball for a little bit. I wish I could say I did that right every single time. Not always the case. That we get so fixated on the work that we miss God working. And I believe he's inviting you into his work in the midst of your work. Can we allow him, will we allow him to interrupt our work? That's part of being generous with your work because it's not yours. God, here's what I'm doing, but if you want to redirect me, if you want to interrupt me, I'll follow you. Allow Jesus to interrupt your work. The other part here that we see these servants do, these workers do, is they did hard work. Fill these jars up. Let's go back and read. Each one, there were 6 of them, each one could hold how much? 20 to 30 gallons. That's a lot of water. If I'm one of these servants, once again, I'm thinking, why me? What's the point? What's the purpose? Why are you asking us to do such hard work? Surely there's an easier way. We love finding easier ways. And sure, there's something about being efficient and effective. We can have another conversation around that. But in this moment, Jesus' words were, fill up these jars of water, all the way up. Not just a couple of them, all 6 of them. Fill up all 6 of them and do the hard work. Now, as I'm studying this, here's my problem with this. Here's my challenge. Here's what's going through my head. Another transparent moment. Again, no judgment. Jesus, why don't you just miraculously do this as well? Why isn't this part of the miracle? If you're gonna already turn water into wine, why not miraculously fill up the water? Why not fill the jars up and do the water? Why not do a 2-for-1? And this is gonna be a more epic miracle. This will be a lot better if you do it this way. Like that makes a lot of sense. And then you don't have to have these poor servants, these poor workers fill up these water jars. Jesus, you can do it. Why not make it, what's the word? Easier. Why not make this easier? I think there's a reason behind that. I think there's a reason that he's inviting these workers and inviting us to do some hard work. I don't have a great answer. I think that's probably one of those mysteries of God that we have to continue to seek. But here's how I would how I've at least been thinking through that. Is my dad growing up, he was always doing a different project around the house. One of the big projects that I remember him doing was finishing our unfinished basement in one of our houses. And what I remember specifically about that project is not the work my dad did. I remember him inviting me into that work with him. I remember him giving me a little apron, and I got my toolbox, and he's got his toolbox, and we began to work on our base. I'm the one on the right, just so we're clear. I do look a lot like my dad. But we began to work on finishing the basement together. Now, a couple things is one, I guarantee you my dad did not need my help. There is nothing of value that I'm gonna bring to the table to actually help this project. There's nothing I can do that my dad really needed me for. I also know, I'm very certain of this, it took a whole lot longer with me actually there helping. I wasn't adding any value, and it actually took a little bit longer, and it probably didn't turn out as great because of my involvement. But for my dad, it was not about finishing the basement. It was about a relationship. And he invited me into his work to spend time with me, to work with me, to allow me the opportunity to work with him. And you know what? I learned a lot of lessons through that work. It would have been a lot easier if my dad just did it. My relationship grew with him. I learned a lot of lessons through it. I'm glad I did the work. I think there's something there in how our Heavenly Father works with us. He invites you into his work, how he's working. He does not need us. he chooses to include us. And he includes us in work for a relationship so that he and you get to spend some time together. And you know what he's gonna do through that work? He's not just gonna work on the project, he's gonna work on you. And through the work, you'll notice it's not just about the work anymore. It's also about the relationship. So why the hard work? Well, I think he wanted to do the hard work with you. I think he wanted to be part of something with you. So allow Jesus to interrupt, but be okay doing the hard work because he's inviting you to do it with him. Here's the last thing I would say, and we get this from the very last part. Now go dip out. So after they fill up the jars with water, when the jars had been filled, verse 8, Jesus said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. Okay, you understand what's happening here? We say like religious ceremony washing. What that really means is bath water. That's what that is. So they just filled up this bathtub, these 6 bathtubs full of water, bath water, and he said, dip some out and go and take it to your boss to drink. Do you see where I'm going with this? That's not gonna go well. If I'm one of these workers, I'm thinking, you do it, Jesus. Once again, why me? Because if somebody gets fired after he tastes this, it's me that gets fired, not Jesus. There is a huge element of trust that these servants, these workers had to have had in Jesus to take this water out, because at this point, it had not turned to wine. He said, dip the water out, the bath water, take it over to the master of ceremonies and hand it to him. And they did just that. So in the midst of you giving your work to God, being generous with your work, there has to be trust. And here's the trust. It's trusting Jesus with the results. Because so often we begin to second guess ourselves. Did I do enough? Did my work work? Did it work? Did this miracle actually work? Did I fill him up the right way? Did I do it the way that he told me to do it? Did I do everything the way it was supposed to happen so that it would work? And at the end of the day, you cannot focus on your work. You got to focus on your trust in Jesus. Trust Jesus with the results. Parents, I think this is probably the part we struggle with the most in regards to our work with our kids. Because your kids get a little bit older and you're like, oh man, I hope I did this thing right. Did I parent you right? Did it work? Did my parenting actually work? And then they get a little bit older and then they graduate and you're like, man, I really hope this worked. And then they even get a little bit older and they move out of the house and you're still like, I really, really hope this worked. We worry that our work was not enough or that our work didn't work. And at the end of the day, it's trusting Jesus with the results. We are to be faithful and generous with what he has given us. And we do the hard work. We allow him to interrupt us in the midst of our work. We follow him, not just in our faith life, but in all the aspects of our life, including our work life. And then we trust him with the results. That's all we can do. We have to be willing to trust him, be faithful with what he has given us, be generous with what he's given us, and trust him with the rest. And you know what that does? It actually does something pretty phenomenal. It releases the burden of worry. When you are responsible for your work, then you are responsible for the results. But when you say, God, I'm trusting you, like this is my work, I'm giving it to you. When I give you my work, now it's not my work, now it's your work. Who's responsible for it? He is. Who has to deal with the problems? He does, not me. So all of a sudden, I don't have to worry as much about, did I do enough or is my work working? God, I've given you my work. It's no longer mine, it's your work, which means I've given you the responsibility and I trust you with the results. You no longer are responsible. You trusting in him, that's the priority. We do the hard work, but we do so with a surrendered heart and a surrendered life. Here's how the end of the story goes, verse 9. When the master of ceremonies tested the water, that was now turned to wine. Bet those servants were nervous all the way up to that first drink, man. Not knowing where it had come from. He had no idea where this had come from. But look, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. He said, a host always serves the best wine first, he said. Then when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now. Verse 11, the miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee, it was the first time Jesus revealed his glory and his disciples believed in him. Verse 12, after the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. I want to make two quick observations here on how the story concludes. The first one is, did you catch who knew about the miracle? The servants. The servants and the disciples, that's it. And the family was standing right there too, as far as Jesus' mother. That's it. Did the boss, the master of ceremonies, know that a miracle had just taken place? No. Did the bride know that a miracle took place? No. The groom? No. The rest of the guests, the rest of the bridal party, the rest of the attendees? No. Nobody else knew that a miracle took place except for these workers, these servants. And I think there's something there. That Jesus's first miracle, the beginning of his work, the only people that actually knew about it were the servants, the one that he invited into this work with him. And not only did they get to witness his first miracle, they were part of it. He invited them in and included them to participate in his very first miracle, but nobody else knew. When you surrender and when you are generous with your work and you take your work and you allow it to be God's work, you get to see things that you would never see if you were not working with him, if he had not invited you into that work. When we're generous with our work and we allow him to redirect our work, oh, you will be amazed on how God will use your work for his kingdom. The other observation I would make is it went well beyond just this day at the wedding party. It went well beyond just even their work as servants at the wedding party. At the very end of verse 11, so we know that the workers, the servants, they were aware of of what happened with the miracle. But then in verse 11, this was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is very, very early on into Jesus' ministry and his work. The disciples are just now starting to come alongside of him. And there's still a little doubts of who is this man and what is he really about? And he's been saying this, but there's still some doubts there with the disciples. So for these workers, the miracle that Jesus allowed them to be part of, invited them and included them in on, actually was part of and pivotal in the faith of the rest of the disciples. And here's what that means for us. When your work is surrendered to God and you allow him to work in you and through you and you come alongside and work with him, imagine the people that you have no idea will be impacted by that work that will. These low on the success chain, on the success ladder, so to speak, they had no business being part of what Jesus invited them to be part of. But he included them, allowed them to participate in it, and then their work led to the disciples believing in Jesus. That's what it means to give your life away for the sake of the gospel, to do the work that God's put in front of you, because you have no idea the lives that could be impacted because of the work that you get to do with him. Not separate from him, but with him. Just like those servants, the work goes well beyond just the work. Jesus can use your work for his work. He can use your work for something well beyond what you could ever do on your own, what you could ever accomplish on your own. Being generous with your work and your labor means, God, it's not mine, it's yours. And you can use my work for your work. So how do we do that practically? What does it look like to truly live that out? Let me give you two passages and then I'm going to give you a prayer. In 1 Corinthians 15, we're told this. So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord. Notice who we're working for. We're working for Jesus, as though we are working for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless or ever in vain. In other words, he's going to use your work and he's going to put it to work. It's going to make a difference. Colossians 3, 23 and 24, similar concept. Work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward and that the master you are serving is Christ. So you're focusing in on not the work, but you're focusing on the Savior. And you begin to have this posture of whatever you want to do with me and through me, I will do your work. So here's a prayer. I think this is the best way to start in this kind of a posture. How am I going to be generous with my work? It starts with your heart, which begins, in my opinion, with prayer. Here's the prayer. Lord, I give you my work to use for your work. That's it. You start there. And here's how I'd like you to begin to pray through this before you go to work. Take just a moment. I did it this morning. Pulled up in the parking lot, sat in my car just for a couple minutes. Before I jumped into work mode, it was, Lord, I give you my work for your work. Before you go home and you start all the work of the house and the work with the family, Lord, you sit in the driveway, I give you my work to be used for your work. Tomorrow morning, on your way to work, I give you my work to be used for your work. Allow your heart posture to start there, because it's not about your work. It's not about the work. I'm talking about prayer. It's not about your work, and it's not about the work. It's about his work that he's inviting you and including you to be part of. Last thing I want to say, and then we'll move on. We have to talk about this. I can't talk about all this stuff with work and not mention this. Yes, it's a Clemson Cup. Go Tigers. Here's what you need to know. Work is a good thing. God gave us work. God worked. Genesis chapter 1, he worked. He created. He worked. Genesis chapter 2, he gave Adam a job to do. He said, here's your work. Do these things. So work is not a bad thing. Work is a good thing. Again, whether you get paid for it, unpaid, or whether it's just part of your responsibilities, work is good. We, of course, with our sin nature, we can twist that and it can become very evil and very harmful. We can use work to abuse people. We can use work as a way to isolate ourselves. We could go down the list on how work can be harmful. But here's what we have to make sure of. You know this, right? It's a very common phrase. You can't pour out of what kind of a cup? An empty cup. You cannot pour out what you do not have. So the question is, how do we stay filled up so that we can be generous with our work? How do we stay filled up so we can truly give our work away? Genesis chapter 1, we'll go back to the creation story real quick. God created all things in how many days? 6. Good job. What did he do on day 7? He rested. Good. So follow my progression here. He worked, then he rested from his work. That's what God did. Makes a lot of sense. Then he created Adam. Adam was created on which day? The 6th day. Good job. Yes. Adam was created on the 6th day, the very last day of creation, which means if Adam was created on the very last day of creation, what was Adam's first full day like? It was on the day of rest. So Adam's first full day was not a day of work. Adam's first full day was a day of rest. And then he was given work. So follow me. God worked, then rested from his work. We were not created to do that. We were created to first rest in him. And out of our rest, we work. So often we try to do the opposite. We try to work like gods. We try to work, and then I'll just take a break. We were not created for that. If you try to live that way of work, you will constantly be trying to pour out what you do not have. God created us to first be filled by him, to rest in him. And out of our rest with him, out of our relationship with him, we work. But it's not just about our work and getting work done. It's, Lord, I give you my work for your work, to use as your work. But you have to come to a place where you rest in him first. And out of that comes our work. Rest first. Rest in him. Rest in your relationship with him. Allow him to fill you up so that we can be generous.